What are Chiori's biggest pros and cons? That's what I'll be telling you today. Let's get into it. Genshin really lacks good Geo support. Goro is mediocre at best, being outclassed by Bennett and Itto teams before C6, and there's very little he can do for Navia. And Albedo is a very outdated sub-DPS for the current best Geo DPS teams. None of the big three care about an EM buff. Like seriously, who burned down the kitchen when designing Albedo's passives? Chiori's appearance finally comes to the rescue, becoming a new best-in-slot pick in all Geo DPS teams. This makes Chiori a big fat indirect buff to Geo on the whole. That matters because a big part of an element's value is the characters it can work well with. Think about why Hydro has such a positive reputation. You need it for almost everything, and the element pairs well with almost all meta teams in the game. Chiori is going to be miles ahead of Albedo, even in teams without Geo Construct. And if you do have Construct, it's incomparable. Her trumping Albedo completely and renewing the double Geo core makes Chiori more worth considering, and by extension, Geo more worth considering. I can already see the Zhongli Chiori core being something exciting. You can apply this core to a multitude of teams. Anywhere where double Geo is welcome, Chiori is welcome, so she is a bit more flexible than you might expect. But the main drawback to the core is that it can't be justified over running double Hydro or Pyro, but it is still a strong duo option if those other units are already being used up, or simply as a new and fresh choice. If I was to say, you can expect Chiori to be about 40% better than Albedo without Construct, that's pretty crazy. Though if Goro is added, this gap does get smaller because Albedo can snapshot those buffs. Keep that in mind. It also means that Chiori makes certain units more worth playing. Take Itto for example. Made a whole video on that guy's flaws. And one major point of contention is his lack of options, and how Albedo was his previous best sub-DPS. Well, Chiori is going to seriously improve the performance of that team. No, Itto is not getting elevated to meta status, but this does at least make Itto Geo teams a bit more competitive compared to before. That's another thing. Chiori has a defining best-in-slot use case. The teams she plays in may not be the best, yet she renders them into being actual viable choices. Always better to have more options over less. Something else to note is how Chiori's Geo teams don't demand contested units. There will be a bunch of workarounds you can employ to make the most use out of her. So if you're an aspiring Itto main, I seriously suggest you consider getting her. There's a negative to consider though. If you don't already have Itto and want to play Itto Chiori, good luck getting them both in the first half. She has an extremely natural synergy with the team's makeup. There are 3 Construct users in the team. This allows Chiori to take full advantage of her Construct-based buff. And if you're a free-to-play, lacking Construct spawning units, Geo Traveler is unironically an option. Always nice to see the MC gain an actual use case. And if you're a Geo enthusiast on the whole, Chiori offers a grand upgrade to the double Geo core. Granted, she doesn't fix Geo's core issues. She just contributes a solid amount of damage to these teams. Keep that in mind. Chiori's high investment is nothing short of incredible. She goes from being a slightly better side grade in Navia teams to being an actual upgrade over the other choices. And don't even get me started on Itto Geo. Okay, so why is it so good? Well, we can start with her con. C2 is incredible for her. You get much more value out of her kit with these, with C2 being a grand increase to your output on the whole. Also, have a look at her C1. Seems pretty useless, right? Well, Chiori's C1 is what enables her to be used as an upgrade in Navia teams. This is a big deal since our Spina di Rosula is the best Geo unit we have in the game right now. Or Zhongli, up to you, they're interchangeable. So working well with her is a massive plus. Cons enable a new level of effectiveness for her. Also, having some of her cons means you'll have a lot more tomatoes. Her little puppets are called tomatoes, but I'll just say tomato, which means a lot more damage. And if you play with Navia, then you'll be generating a whole lot more crystallizes. So her synergy really improves with Navia on the whole. You really don't have to go beyond C2 either, so it means most of Chiori's major buffs are available to you more cheaply compared to other units. Think about why people commonly value Raiden C2 so heavily. The con is not totally inaccessible, being a huge damage jump not requiring C4 to 6. Also Chiori's signature weapon. Very nice.
Nice. Well, of course it's her best. It's her signature after all.
I hear you say. And to that I respond, but there is always a certain bar of quality for how good a unit's signature is. There should generally always be a 15 to 20% increase to the character's damage. Mediocre signatures will be ones which are easily replaceable with other closely performing options. Poor Itto can't catch a break, since his Stone Thresher is hardly better than R5 Serpent Spine. And a good signature will be like Nuvale's, a hefty increase over other choices, albeit he's still playable without it. Chiori's signature is a double-edged sword. It falls in line with Ayaka's Mistsplitter. The option itself is totally insane for the character and makes them perform a whole lot better. This does contribute to Chiori having good high investment, since the weapon itself benefits her kit and the team she plays in quite a lot. But for Ayaka as well as Chiori, their free options in turn really stink, which just makes it hard for free-to-play and new players. This does all beg the question of Chiori's free-to-play friendliness as a whole. I'll touch on that later on. By the way, if you're enjoying the video, why not consider liking and subscribing? Maybe even leaving a cool comment down below. If you do, then Chiori will upgrade your style points right to the max. You'll be the drippiest person to ever live. Okay, this looks small, but it's actually worth covering. Chiori's tomatoes can't get broken. This has quite a few pluses to it. Firstly, a massive complaint about Albedo is how often his flower breaks. If that Geo flower snaps in half, you lose everything. His particle generation, his sub DPS, any burst procs, your house. Be careful, Albedo has located you.
I will find you.
You get the idea. His construct is not reliable, and this happens far more than you think. Say that you're playing an Itto Geo team, and you think you're sorted for ER. After all, Albedo's around. Well, in actual practice, you might find yourself more strapped for particles than you might have thought, thanks to good old Geo construct. Zhongli is a similar issue. His pillars are more sturdy, but they can still break. You set up his pillar to do a few things, other than shields of course. Or build pencils. I was gonna say pencils. First, particles. His pillar already only has a 50% chance to generate energy, so getting that broken isn't too great for an already struggling economy. Man, if only Morax was around to fix this messed up market.
Adios.
And secondly, to a lesser extent, small damage contributions. You'll never get much damage out of Zhongli's pillars, but hey, it's there. Chiori's tomatoes not being a construct is both a blessing and a curse. It's a shame that it doesn't contribute to her own buff count, yet it was arguably a good decision since she does not suffer from these similar issues. Her tomatoes will always reliably produce results, and they do so very well. Alright, that's enough of the pros. We have to discuss the outlying issues of this unit. A big shortcoming of Chiori is her burst. This is 50% of her kit completely thrown down the drain. It's a big nuke of geo damage. Okay, yippee, big number, but it does nothing to support her team. Worse yet, she does nothing to support herself. A selfish burst which buffs herself would have been much better than what we got, because the majority of her kit's use derives from her tomatoes. It would have contributed more damage to the team overall as opposed to a worthless nuke. That's the DPS's job, for Pete's sake. It was also a huge missed opportunity to provide some real buffing to the likes of Navia. I think a lot of us are hurt by the fact that we were robbed of a genuine 5-star specialized Geo support. Chiori is a good sub DPS, we've established that, but her presence in the game was really not needed. We have Albedo already. And while Chiori is definitely a lot better than Albedo, I think a proper Geo support which boosted the main 3 DPSs of the element would have been so much better over having a strong sub DPS. Some of you might think that's kind of overkill, but look at the Fontainian meta. Overkill is its middle name. Almost every Fontaine unit has been a hit, and the strong ones are really strong. There's no harm in pushing up the likes of Itto to meet these current rising standards. Plus, if Nuvale and Linny are allowed to be such powerful behemoths, then why not Navia too? She is very strong too, don't get me wrong. But imagine if Chiori was that piece of the puzzle we were all waiting for. There's no telling how much greater Navia would have been. Alas, we'll all just have to hold on to those horses for now. I don't think it would have been hard to incorporate even some mild buffing into your kit, like having the amount of tomatoes on field dictate how much attacker def she boosts. Something along those lines. This is a problem that extends beyond Chiori's burst, and delves more into the issues of her kit design on the whole, and how there was no demand for a kit like hers. The burst not even being selfish was a huge slap in the face. Disappointing aspect of Chiori on the whole.
I can smell the failure.
Granted, there is one silver lining. If this theoretical Geo support was to get added, then Chiori would also be a strong recipient of these buffs. Aside from that, I believe Chiori's disappointing burst highlights a greater sentiment we all hold about her in this community. Like I've said, I delve more into her free-to-play friendliness. Since it's in the con section, you know we're in for something fun. As I've already stated, she likes her signature a little too much. There are not going to be any genuinely good free-to-play friendly 4-star options for her. It's all a big pile of cope. Even our secondary 5-star options will pale in comparison to her signature. Even Ayaka doesn't stoop that low. Usable Chiori options will consist of these 5-star side grades or event-limited 4-star. Actual non-event or non-gacha weapons will have little effect on her. Constellations aren't needed, I think she's fine at C0. I mostly want to highlight her reliance on her weapon. There's a reason I gushed about her constellations after all. Now, I'm a big advocate for expense is not bad if you're rewarded for said expense. That is often up to personal judgment. Of course, there is still some general common sense to it. Nobody is gonna say C2 Albedo is better than a C2 Yolong. The best way to illustrate this point is for comparison to other expensive units. Then it's up to you to decide. Is Chiori's expense worth it? Ayaka's already been mentioned, so she will act as our point of reference. Geo and Cryo are almost equally as bad in my opinion, so it remains fair. Chiori needs her signature for competence with no free-to-play choice. Ayaka needs her signature for decency, but it's at least 2 decent craftable free-to-play options. Chiori is a side grade in Navia teams at C0 and is a beast in Itto teams. Ayaka is the poster child of freeze and is also very competent in mono cryo. Notice how we're comparing a sub DPS with a DPS's expenses, because there is legit no other 5-star sub DPS with this high of an expense level. Yes, she beats Albedo, but at least that guy can effectively use Harbinger of Dawn. When it comes to valuing her expense, is she worth investing so much into over a decent R1 DPS with more flexible options? But this isn't the last of our problems, so I'm going to come back to this question later on. But feel free to comment your thoughts on this phenomenon down below. Okay, let's address the elephant in the room. We have to look at the bad side of Chiori's construct situation. If you want to unlock Chiori's full potential, you have to play her with mediocre units. At least if Ayaka is mentioned earlier, you can stick her with Farina Charlotte, and she can use Kazuha. Albedo's EM buff did something back in the day when it came to Hu Tao teams. Such cannot be said for Chiori. A fair amount of Geo characters have a construct in their kit, so you would think it's not a big deal. Yet in reality, how many of these characters are actually good? Not a lot. Wanting to play with Itto is pretty unfortunate. It's a shame that Navia teams are getting the short end of the stick with Chiori's release. Albedo is very outdated, but the secret to absolutely no one. It's not a surprise that Albedo was one of the first candidates put forward to be added to the Chronicled Wish. This is Hoyo admitting he is bad.
Albedo.
Zhongli is fine, but you choose him to protect your team. You don't really need a mitigator in Geo teams on Zhongli's level. Itto scales on death, he's a tanky guy. He prefers a mitigator or healer that also buffs significantly. It's no wonder that Itto benefits from Bennett, and his buffing outside of that role is only okay. Who a unit can partner with is a big deal. It's great and all to have a solid kit, but who cares if you're playing with trash? It's one of the reasons why Xiangling is so good. She pairs with many highly competent 5-star units while also having a decent kit. Once again, quite a big shame, but the best Geo unit has nothing to do with constructs. Being bound to mono Geo is not great. If you have a cup of cheap instant noodles and you put some expensive seasoning on it, you're still eating a cup of instant noodles. The team has flaws outside of lower damage. No reactions, so the comp can never use indirect buffs. Bricked by shield breaking abysses, a lot of outdated units comprise the team, and the list goes on. Speaking of shield breaking abysses, imagine if Hoyoverse gave Geo something special like they did to any other element. Geo right now has nothing but a little damage on top that it offers. Imagine they made a Geo a Joker type of element, but ignores shield. It would turn into a hyper-flexible element that you could use in so many situations, and suddenly the raw numbers would actually have a chance to come into play. It would still not make Geo as broken as Hydro, but it would elevate the element from trash tier to genuinely usable. Alright, enough of the tangent. Having a large portion of Chiori's damage sealed behind constructs really restricts her. Yes, she will be better than Albedo without them, but Burnt Food isn't that much of an improvement over Ashes. This is where it becomes a shame that her tomatoes don't count as construct. It's sad that Hoyo hard-locked her into construct-based Geo teams with that mechanic. And therefore, Chiori will always be held back by the quality of the Geo units surrounding her. So her long-lasting shelf life is going to be totally dependent on indirect buffs. And Chiori's own release shows that we shouldn't be too dependent on those happening to Geo. Chiori has the ability to do some short on-field, so you can play her as a DPS if you want. This is more of a nitpick as it isn't a central part of her kit, more like a bonus that you can occasionally weave into your regular rotation. But missed potential is still missed potential. First off, every single character up until this point that relies on infusions overrides all of her infusions. For whatever reason, Hoyoverse decided that this already suffering unit should be the one to break the chain. Chiori gets overridden by C6 Bennett, fellas. So what, I hear you say? Well, C6 Bennett on the whole is a positive thing. I highly recommend activating it if you haven't already. It boosts almost all the teams he really excels in. Itto's Geo Infusion doesn't get overridden by a C6, and Bennett is actually a more effective buffer over a C0 to 5 Goro. So there is a feasible reason to use Bennett with your Itto. And since Chiori is practically glued to that guy, yeah, you'll never be using Chiori's normals in that kind of setup. And for those wondering, the cooldowns in an Itto Geo team don't synergize harmoniously. It is the one team where you use Zhongli's burst to fill up downtime, so Chiori's normal attack strings could have had a place here. But if you're playing Itto Bennett with C6 Benny, not a chance. You can at least weave in these normals during the downtime of Navia's nukes, but once again, Bennett is quite a popular choice in Navia teams. And for the record, Navia's Geo normals override Bennett's Pyro Infusion. Okay, I get it. Some of you, C5 Bennett is what you've got, and this doesn't apply to you. Well, Chiori's normals aren't exactly going to do that much damage either. Legit, why did they add this aspect to her kit? It's next to useless. Once again, another missed opportunity to add some actual minor buffing capabilities into her kit. And how does she fare as an on-field DPS herself? Really, I can't expect her to be any better than Itto without Chiori, which is ironic. So that's another part of her kit down the gutter. On the whole, I think Chiori does have some good aspects to her. It's not like she is bad through and through with no redeemable qualities. Even with all her issues and the sentiment of angry Navia mains, at least Chiori is best in slot in most Geo teams. She's still an upgrade in spite of everything. I absolutely recommend pulling for her if you're an Itto main. Outside of that, Navia mains, count your primos. I don't think she's worth getting if you already use Zhongli Albedo with her, unless you're willing to get at least C1 R1. Same goes for Noelle enjoyers, be wary of what you're getting yourself into. Thanks to Hoyoverse for releasing a character that works with scissors. After all, they cut up our dreams of having an actual Navia support.